My name's Sherry, and life's been kicking me hard these days. Just 6 months ago, I walked out of what was supposed to be my forever love story. Add to that, my grandma's losing herself to dementia, and it feels like the walls are closing in on me. I was at my job at the local library, trying to focus on reshelving books, but my mind was miles away with Grandma. That's when my best friend, Jess, walked in, her face all scrunched up with worry the way it does when she's about to give me a piece of her mind. "Sherry, you look like hell," Jess stated bluntly, her hands on her hips. "Thanks, Jess, you always know how to cheer me up," I replied, the sarcasm dripping from every word. "No, seriously, Sherry. This ain't healthy. You need help, someone professional to talk to," she insisted, her gaze softening. I knew she was right. The sleepless nights and constant anxiety were wearing me down. So, I sighed. "Maybe you're right. Do you know anyone?" She nodded eagerly. "Dr. Fisher. Heard he's good with cases like yours. I'll text you his details." I wasn't sure about spilling my guts to a stranger, but something had to give. The very next day, I found myself sitting in Dr. Fisher's office, a cozy room with soft light and too many diplomas on the wall. He was older, maybe in his late 40s, with a calm demeanor that made the room feel safer. "So, Sherry, tell me what's been troubling you," he began, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Where do I even start?" I thought. "It's everything. I left my fiancé, my grandma's sick, and I just feel stuck," I managed to say, the words tumbling out. Dr. Fisher nodded, jotting down notes. "It sounds like you're carrying a heavy load. Let's unpack that together, shall we?" As the sessions went on, I found myself telling him things I hadn't even admitted to myself. He never judged, just listened and offered the occasional, or, "I see." It was like unclogging years of pent-up fear and sadness. One particular day, I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the world. I actually smiled, feeling a flicker of hope. That night, at my small apartment, as I was heating up some canned soup, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Fisher, something about a follow-up appointment. I stared at the screen for a long moment. This guy was becoming my lifeline, and part of me hated that I needed him so much. The days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, 2 years had passed since I first stepped into Dr. Fisher's office. I started feeling like I could breathe again without a boulder pressing on my chest. I even managed to laugh genuinely at a joke Jess made. It was during one of these lighter moments that my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I picked it up anyway. "Hello, Sherry, it's Dr. Fisher," the voice on the other end said. I was taken aback. "Dr. Fisher? Is everything okay?" I asked, a hint of worry creeping into my voice. Yes, everything's fine. I was calling to discuss your progress and, perhaps extend an invitation," he said, a nervous chuckle following his words. "An invitation?" I echoed, curiosity piqued. "Yes, I thought, perhaps, we could meet for a coffee, outside the office. You've made tremendous progress, and I think it might be beneficial to see things from a new perspective," he suggested. I paused, chewing my lip. This was uncharted territory. "Isn't that, like, against some rule or something?" I finally asked. There was a brief silence. "Well, you're not my patient anymore. I thought it might be nice to catch up in a more relaxed setting," he replied. Something about the way he said it made me agree. "Okay, sure, coffee sounds nice," I said, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. We met at a local cafe the following Saturday. It was weird seeing him outside the office, in jeans and a casual shirt. He looked normal, almost like a different person. "You look well, Sherry," he said as he greeted me with a warm smile. "Thanks, Dr. Fisher. I feel better too," I replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Please, call me Robert. We're not in the office now," he said with a light laugh. I nodded, feeling a bit awkward. "Okay, Robert." The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his love for hiking and how he always wanted to visit the Grand Canyon. I shared my newfound love for painting, a hobby I took up as a form of therapy. As we sipped our coffee, he leaned in, his eyes serious, but kind. "Sherry, I've seen you grow and overcome so much. You're incredibly strong, you know that?" I blushed, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "Thanks, I guess I had a good therapist," I replied with a small smile. He chuckled. "Well, I can't take all the credit. You did the hard work." The cafe began to empty as we continued talking, oblivious to the time passing. It was only when the waiter came to clean up that we realized hours had flown by. "Guess we better head out," I said, feeling a twinge of disappointment. Robert stood up, offering a hand to help me up. "Sherry, I've enjoyed this more than I thought. Would you be interested in doing this again? Maybe dinner next time?" I hesitated, a mix of excitement and caution swirling inside me. But looking into his sincere eyes, I found myself nodding. "Yeah, dinner sounds great." The initial charm of our dinners and casual meetups quickly turned into a full-blown romance. Before I knew it, Robert and I were inseparable. He was attentive, caring, and always there to lend a hand, especially with Grandma's situation. I thought I'd hit the jackpot, that my life was finally taking a turn for the better. But after the wedding, the man I married started to change, or maybe his true colors began to show. It started subtly. He'd make comments about my friends, "You're better off without them," or "They don't really care about you." At first, I brushed it off as overprotectiveness, but then it got worse. He became possessive, needing to know where I was every minute of the day. His control seeped into every aspect of my life. He insisted I quit my job, saying he didn't want me to stress about work. "You don't need to work. I can provide everything. Trust me, Sherry," he'd say, his voice firm. But it wasn't about the money. It was about freedom, about having something that was just mine. Yet, I found myself nodding along, resigning from my job, and becoming entirely dependent on him. That was his plan all along. Then came the isolation. He'd check my phone, monitor my calls and texts. "Who are you talking to? Why are you laughing? Tell me," he'd demand, his eyes wild with an unsettling intensity. "It's just Jess, you know her," I'd stutter out, feeling like a child caught in a lie. He'd snort. "Jess, huh? She's no good for you. I don't want you talking to her anymore." It was insane. I felt like I was losing my mind. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him, my voice shaking but loud. "I can't do this, Robert. I can't live like you're my warden. I need my life back." He just laughed, a cold, heartless sound that echoed through the house. "Your life? Sherry, your life is with me now. And if you even think about leaving, what about your grandmother? Without me, she's back on the streets. Remember that." I was trapped. Every time I thought about standing up to him, about leaving, the image of my sweet, confused grandma being thrown out of the care facility would stop me dead in my tracks. I was caught in a web of his making, every move calculated to keep me under his thumb. Nights became my only solace, the only time I could cry without fear of reprimand. I'd lay in bed, the man I thought I loved snoring next to me, and wonder how I got here. How did the charming, caring man I married turn into this monster? I realized too late that the signs were there from the beginning. His need for control, his dismissal of my friends, his insistence on me quitting my job. I was blinded by the need for love, for someone to care. And now, I was paying the price. I had to do something, anything. I couldn't live like this, not really living at all. But every time I thought about acting, his threats against my grandmother would paralyze me. It was a vicious cycle of fear, control, and utter hopelessness. And I had no idea how to break free. After months of being under Robert's thumb, I felt like I was fading away, becoming a ghost in my own life. The vibrant, independent woman I once was had been replaced by a shadow, flinching at the sound of his voice, jumping at the slam of a door. The house felt like a prison, and Robert was the warden, his rules the chains binding me. One evening, as we sat in what was supposed to be our cozy living room, the tension was particularly thick. I was on edge, trying to appear small, invisible, but he was like a storm, brewing and ready to burst. "Why don't you ever look at me when I talk to you?" Robert snapped suddenly, his eyes narrow slits. I flinched. I'm sorry, I was just thinking about something. Always thinking, always in your head. You're here with me, remember that. I'm your husband. His voice rose with each word, the last almost a shout. I nodded, murmuring apologies, trying to placate the rising fury in him. But it was no use. He was in one of his moods, and there was no calming the storm. "You know what? I've had enough of this attitude. You need to learn." His voice was cold, calculated. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Robert, please, you're hurting me," I cried out, fear overtaking me. He dragged me to the small storage room, the one place I hated the most. It was dark, windowless, a tiny box of a room. "Maybe some time in the dark will teach you to appreciate what you have," he hissed, pushing me inside. I stumbled, falling to the cold floor as he slammed the door shut, plunging the room into complete darkness. My heart raced, panic clawing at my throat. I've always been terrified of the dark, a fear I once shared with him, back when I thought he cared. "Robert, please. Let me out. I'm scared of the dark, remember?" I shouted, my voice cracking. His laughter was the last thing I heard before his footsteps faded away. There I was, alone in the dark, the weight of my situation crushing me. I curled up in a corner, my body shaking with sobs. Time passed, I don't know how long. It felt like an eternity. Every creak and whisper of the house made me jump, my imagination conjuring monsters in the shadows. But the real monster was just outside the door, the man I had married. Finally, the door creaked open, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. "Have we learned our lesson?" Robert's voice dripped with mockery. I couldn't speak, couldn't look at him. I just nodded, anything to get out of that room. He pulled me up, his grip still tight but slightly less punishing. "Good. Remember this feeling, Sherry. Remember who's in charge here." As I stumbled back to the living room, my legs weak and my eyes adjusting to the light, I felt a deep, burning shame. How had I let it come to this? How had I become someone so weak, so controlled? But beneath the shame and fear, a spark of something else flickered. Anger. I was angry at him for treating me this way, and angry at myself for allowing it. That dark room had been a wake-up call. I couldn't live like this, couldn't let him snuff out the last bit of me. Amidst the despair of my darkening world, a glimmer of unexpected hope emerged. I discovered I was pregnant. As I held the positive test, a wave of emotions overtook me, fear, uncertainty, but also a fierce protective love. I clung to the hope that this news might soften Robert, maybe even bring back a trace of the man I had fallen in love with. With a trembling heart, I approached him that evening. "Robert, I have something to tell you. We're going to have a baby." His reaction was immediate and terrifying. His face contorted not into joy, but into a furious scowl. "A baby? No. That's not going to happen, Sherry." I recoiled, the harshness of his words cutting through me. "But it's our child," I pleaded. "Maybe this can change things, make them better." He was unyielding, his voice icy as he spat out his next words. "No, Sherry. It's going to change nothing. You're going to get rid of it." I felt a surge of defiance against his cruel demand. "No, I won't do that. This child is part of me." In a rage, he grabbed my arm, his fingers pressing into my flesh painfully. "You don't understand, do you? You're mine, everything you have is mine. Your fears, your body, your future." I struggled, but he was too strong. "Robert, please, let me go." Instead of relenting, he dragged me to a small, locked room in the back of our house, a place he knew I avoided at all costs. The room was dark, damp, and crawling with spiders, my deepest, most paralyzing fear. With a shove, I was inside, the door slamming shut behind me. The sound of the lock clicking was like a death knell. My heart raced, and I could hear the skittering of spiders in the darkness. I was trapped, the small space closing in on me, the creeping terror of the spiders consuming me. "Let's see how long your maternal instincts last now," he taunted from the other side of the door. I screamed, pounded on the door, but it was useless. The hours stretched on in that dark, horrifying space. My mind raced with fear for myself and my unborn child. How could I bring a life into this nightmare? Eventually, the door opened. Robert's silhouette filled the doorway, a smirk on his face. "Well, have you thought it over? Will you get rid of the problem now?" Weak, terrified, but resolute, I whispered through my tears, "No." That defiance cost me dearly. He left me there longer, the spiders, my only company. The last thing I remember is falling to the floor and fainting. Waking up in the sterile white of the hospital room, I was momentarily disoriented, the beeping machines and four-line foreign intruders in my muddled consciousness. Memories flooded back, Robert, the spiders, the darkness, and a shudder rippled through me. But amidst the fear, a new sensation bubbled within me, the fierce, protective love for the tiny life growing inside me. I knew I had to act, not just for me, but for my unborn child. As soon as I was alone, I carefully pulled out the phone I had hidden away and dialed my cousin, Mark, who worked in the FBI. His voice was a lifeline as I whispered my situation, each word a mixture of fear and hope. "Mark, it's Sherry. I need help. It's Robert. He's..." My voice broke, the reality of it all threatening to overwhelm me. "Sherry, slow down. Tell me everything." Mark's voice was calm, steady. I recounted everything, each word lifting a bit of the weight off my shoulders. Mark's responses were terse, professional, but underneath I could hear the undercurrent of rage. "Sherry, listen to me. I'm going to help you. We're going to get you out of there, but you need to be strong a little longer. Can you do that?" he asked. I nodded into the phone, a silent promise to myself and my baby. "I can, Mark. I have to." "Good. I'm going to make some calls. We'll act fast. Just hang tight and don't do anything to arouse his suspicion," he instructed. I agreed, the plan forming a fragile lifeline in the chaos. The rest of my hospital stay was a blur of doctors and whispered phone calls, each moment stretching into eternity as I awaited my release. When the day finally came to return home, a heavy dread settled over me. The house that once promised love and safety now loomed like a monster, its walls surely echoing with the screams and tears of the past months. Robert was waiting, his presence filling the room like a dark cloud. I braced myself for the confrontation, the culmination of all the fear and resolve that had been building inside me. "Sherry," Robert began, his voice eerily calm. "You're back. How was the hospital?" I kept my voice steady, masking the storm of emotions within. "It was fine. I'm feeling better," I lied, meeting his gaze with a feigned calmness. He circled around me, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Good, good. Because we need to talk about the situation." His eyes flicked down to my still flat stomach, a sneer curling his lips. I clenched my fists, feeling the baby stir within me. "There's nothing to talk about. I've made my decision." Robert's face twisted into a mask of fury. "Your decision? You think you have a choice here?" I swallowed hard, standing my ground. "Yes, I do. This is my body, my child. I won't let you control me anymore." His laugh was cold, devoid of any real humor. "Oh, Sherry, you never learn, do you? I always have control. Always." But this time was different. I had a plan, a lifeline. I just needed to bide my time, play along until I could make my escape. "I'm tired, Robert. I'm going to bed. I said, turning to leave the room. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "You're not going anywhere until we settle this." That's when the front door burst open, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the house. Police officers streamed in, their badges glinting, their faces set in grim determination. "Robert Fisher, you're under arrest for the abuse and unlawful imprisonment of Sherry Fisher," one of the officers announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Robert's face went white, his grip on my arm loosening in shock. "This is ridiculous. She's my wife, she's lying." But I wasn't alone this time. Mark strode in behind the officers, his face a mask of brotherly fury. "No, Robert. You're the liar. We have everything. The recordings, the testimonies. It's over." Robert's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. The officers handcuffed him, reading his rights as he continued to splutter denials and threats. As they led him away, his eyes met mine one last time, a mixture of disbelief and rage. But I didn't cower this time. I met his gaze squarely, the fear inside me replaced by a burning sense of justice. After the chaos had died down, Mark came over to me, his expression softening. "Sherry, are you okay?" I nodded, feeling the tears well up. "Yes, I think so. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for everything." He hugged me tightly, a protective brotherly embrace. "Always, Sherry. Always." The house felt eerily quiet after they left, the shadow of Robert's presence still lingering in the corners. But as I sat there, alone yet free, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The confrontation had been terrifying, but it was the first step towards a new life for me and my child. The world seemed brighter, the air fresher, as I stepped into my new life. The chains of fear and control were finally broken, leaving behind a path paved with hope and the promise of a new beginning. With Robert now facing the consequences of his actions, I could finally breathe, finally plan for the future I wanted for me and my baby. I moved back into my old apartment, the familiar walls a welcome embrace. It needed a bit of work, a touch of paint here, a new picture there, but it was mine. As I unpacked a box of old photos and trinkets, a knock came at the door. Opening it, I found Jess, her face breaking into a wide grin. "Sherry! Look at you, free and radiant as ever." I laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Jess, come in. I've missed you." We sat down, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, a pot of coffee between us. "So, what's the plan now?" Jess asked, her eyes shining with excitement. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her question. "First, I'm going back to work. I need to find my feet again, you know? And then, well, then I'll focus on being the best mom I can be." Jess reached over, squeezing my hand. "You're going to be amazing, Sherry. And hey, if you need anything, you know I'm here, right?" I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "I know, Jess. Thank you." As days turned into weeks, I found a rhythm to my new life. I returned to the library, the books and quiet a comforting presence. My co-workers welcomed me back with open arms, their support a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. The pregnancy progressed, each doctor's visit a mixture of nerves and excitement. And then, one cool autumn morning, my son was born. Holding him in my arms, everything else faded away. He was perfect, a tiny beacon of hope and love. The legal battles with Robert were tough, emotionally draining, but I stood firm, bolstered by the support of Mark, Jess, and my legal team. In the end, justice was served. Robert would spend years behind bars, his threats and control finally silenced. I received a settlement, a sum that secured a comfortable future for my son, my grandmother and me. But more than the money, it was the freedom it represented that mattered. I was no longer bound to a man who saw me as nothing more than an object to control. I was free. As my son grew, so did I. I learned to trust again, to laugh without reservation, to love without fear. I made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and found joy in the little things. One day, as I watched my son play in the park, a thought struck me. We did it, little one. We're really doing it, I whispered, tears of happiness glimmering in my eyes. He looked up, his little face breaking into a smile, and for a moment, everything was perfect.